Come on in, welcome to Idled Out, where we talk all things Survivor. My name is Luke, and today we're talking about Survivor winners who were almost the first person voted out of their winning season. These great players were the best of their respective seasons, but they were very nearly the worst of the worst. A challenge loss, rogue conversation, or stray vote or two away from being the first person voted out of their season instead of its ultimate winner, if things go just a little different. Well, we'd be short a few Survivor legends, and Winners at War would look about 20% different. Yeah, I'ma need the lil cut of Winners at War. For this list, I'll be going chronologically and covering every Survivor winner who had a realistic chance of going home first. It's worth keeping in mind, though, that they didn't. These are all exceptional players who potentially could have weaseled their way out of elimination if they truly needed to, and this is in no way meant to discount any of these wins. If anything, in some of these cases, it actually makes their wins more impressive. Also, keep in mind that most of this is cobbled together through post-game exit press, where by definition, no one has all the information. Sometimes people are salty, sometimes people want to make themselves look better in hindsight, sometimes people just straight up lie. So just keep that in mind, that these are fun hypotheticals of where Survivor history could have gone, and not Survivor gospel. All that said, let's dig into Survivor winners who were almost the first boot. The first winner who was almost the first person out is Richard Hatch in Survivor Borneo. Survivor's very first winner was very nearly its first boot, at least according to executive producer Mark Burnett's book, Survivor: The Ultimate Game, which I actually own. Someone please hold an intervention if I ever buy the BR rules. According to Burnett's book, Hatch was very much on the chopping block that first round, and almost the first boot if not for a day 3 conversation that saved his neck. As we saw in episode 1, the Toggy tribe found him smarmy, bossy, and lazy, which made him one of the initial targets for episode 1 elimination alongside Rudy. The obvious choice was Richard, Burnett writes in the book. It was only Toggy's third day on the island, and though they'd all worked hard to transform their new beach into a home, 72 hours wasn't long enough for Richard to have recovered from his boastfulness on the first day. But per Burnett's book, Hatch came out to the tribe on day 3 after losing the challenge, which really bonded the tribe together and made the impending elimination all the more difficult. And it's very possible that this saved Hatch's life in the game. Burnett again. Richard's admission made him more likable, part of the family, and it pained them to vote even one Toggy off. With that conversation, Richard was spared, and Sonia, the tribe's weakest physical link, was sent home. Now, you can make the reasonable observation that Mark Burnett might be trying to sell a particular narrative here. The first winner almost being the first one out is pretty appealing from a narrative standpoint, but I personally buy it. Hatch was not liked those first few days by most people, and he really only socially recovered in the coming rounds as his friendships with Kelly, Rudy, and Sue crystallized. So it's entirely likely that if Sonia doesn't trip during that first immunity challenge, or even more importantly, Hatch doesn't get vulnerable and come out to the tribe, he's the first boot, and Survivor history is completely different. Who knows? Maybe Sean wins and voting alphabetically becomes the meta instead of voting strategically. The next Survivor winner who was nearly the first boot is another legend, Sandra in Survivor Pearl Islands. Can you fathom Survivor without Sandra? We were 2 seconds away from that. According to several members of Drake, including Fairplay and Burton, Sandra really failed to make connections on Drake those first 3 days, and was the consensus boot should Drake go to Tribal Council first. The first immunity challenge was won by Drake by literal seconds, so it's entirely possible that if the Morgan boys don't stop to strip down naked for some reason, why did they do this again? They actually win the challenge, and Drake is forced to go to Tribal Council first. Of course, we don't know what would have happened for sure and Fairplay and Burton are hardly the most unbiased sources when it comes to Sandra, but Sandra's name would have 100% been in the mix as a potential first vote. And it's not like she has her skill in the challenges to fall back on as a defense. However, to give Sandra credit, she's a very good social player, so it's entirely possible she would have been able to successfully throw someone else under the bus on this first one. But she would need to expend a lot of social capital she might have not yet had to play such a defensive game so early. You've got to remember that though the main alliance on Drake ultimately became Sandra, Krista, and Rupert, with Fairplay and Trish on the side, the initial power center of Drake was Burton, Sean, and Michelle, and they wanted Sandra. This is one where we really will never know what would have happened, but I do think Sandra had a decent shot of going home if Drake lost, which was literally a second or two away from happening, if not for Savage and Rhino dropping Trow. Yeah, Sandra was saved by the bell end.
They better hope they don't lose their weenies out here.
As one of a few winners who received votes at the first Tribal Council, Chris in Survivor Vanuatu is worth bringing up. Chris was targeted by the Brady Bunch because he botched the balance beam in the first immunity challenge, directly leading to Lepevi's loss. It was either going to be Chris or Brooke at this first Tribal Council, but the thing is, though he got 3 votes, I don't actually think Chris was ever in serious danger here. The Fat Five, that's their name, not mine, were already locked in as an alliance before this challenge even began, and none of them seriously considered flipping to Brady's side at all. I mean, these ding-dongs couldn't even vote down the party line even if they wanted to. Brady Ross Perot's it and votes third party, so despite conventional wisdom saying otherwise, Chris really was not truly in danger on this vote. The next Survivor legend who was almost a first boot is Parvati in Survivor Micronesia. This one's gonna be controversial, but I thought I'd bring it up because I do think there's a universe where if Fairplay doesn't quit, Parvati is the first one out. Johnny Fairplay asked to be voted out on day 3 of Micronesia, sparing the 2 main alliances, the Couples Alliance and the Eliza, Amy, Penner, Yao Man Alliance, of having to go head-to-head for a few more days. But let's take a look at this vote if Fairplay doesn't go home. Who does? To this day, Penner insists that Parvati would have been first out had Fairplay not quit, but this is one where everyone who was there has conflicting opinions, and we really just don't know. Both sides were competing for the votes of Swing Votes, Fairplay, and Sari. Sari was leaning towards the couples, Fairplay towards Penner's side, and both were pretty committed to that vote. This potentially comes down to a 5v5 vote, with Penner's side targeting Parvati or possibly Amanda, but probably not, and Parvati's side targeting Eliza. That makes this a 5v5 vote, which means someone is flipping because nobody is going to Rocks on the first vote. And I don't know which of Sari or Fairplay would have folded. Fairplay's own plan at this point was to take out Parvati to break up the couples, then flip back to Ozzy, whom he adored, to take out Yao Man. Does Sari go along with that plan to avoid going to Rocks? We just don't know, but Parvati was in a lot of danger at the first vote, and both Penner and Fairplay really wanted her out. I hope she sent Danny Bonaducci a Christmas card. The next winner who nearly went home first is Michelle in Survivor Co. Wrong. The consensus seems to be that had Beauty gone to Tribal first, Michelle would have been the easy vote, and Beauty very easily could have lost to Braun in this first immunity challenge. It came down to the puzzle, and Anna was one of their puzzle solvers. By day 3, Michelle hadn't yet made the social connections that carried her game in the back half. And in general, I'd say that she got very lucky that she was able to avoid Tribal Council until the jury phase of the game. This is something Julia even criticizes her for at Final Tribal. Julia argues that Michelle was the weak link on the original Beauty tribe, and that she was lucky that she didn't have to cast a vote until the merge portion of the game. The initial Beauty tribe had a woman's alliance, sure, but that did not actually start until day 4, at least according to Anna. Before that, Michelle and Nick were on the outs, and power lay in the hands of Julia, Anna, Ty, and Caleb. According to Nick's exit press, quote, Michelle was going to be the first person voted out on Beauty on days 1 through 3. because Anna and Julia wanted her out. Other exit press definitely backs that up. Anna says she only started to bond with Michelle on day 4, but to be fair, Ty actually seems to think he was going first, but I don't think Ty has ever said anything critical of anyone, ever. So this could just be him being nice. Had Beauty lost the first immunity challenge, Michelle was definitely the de facto boot. But considering her 2 day 39 runs, I wouldn't put it past her to be able to successfully kick Nick under the bus. And speaking of Nicks, some of us want to kick under the bus. The final winner, who was almost the first boot of their winning season, is Nick in Survivor, David vs. Goliath. As we saw in the very first episode, Nick was very much on the outs of the initial David tribe, and the first vote was probably coming down to him or Pat, or an outside chance of Lyrsa, before Pat was medically evacuated after injuring his back in choppy ocean water. Before Nick became kissing cousins with the Majority Alliance, his neck was very much on the chopping block that first vote. On one side of the vote is Pat, a hard worker and strong as an ox, but a guy who was extremely bossy and obnoxious. And on the other side is Nick, a guy who had no real connections on this tribe, was kinda lazy, and who was just kinda odd. In my opinion, this one would have come down to a game time decision by the rest of the tribe, but personally, I think Nick was the closest person on this list to actually being the first boot. This season's recent enough and this potential vote off so prominent in the edit that we actually have almost everyone on record, so let's just go through the tribe, shall we? Christian, 90% likely that Nick goes first. I did not want Nick to go, the problem was that there were 5 or 6 people who wanted him gone. Davey, 100% Nick would not have been the one to go. I will say I'm not sure if it would have been Pat or Lyrsa, but it would have been one of them. Gabby, the story being told was Nick. I didn't feel great about it. Christian didn't either. In a way, Pat had put a target on his back. I don't know what would have happened. Carl, I didn't hear any other names for that first tribal other than Nick. Elizabeth, Nick was hands down the target before going to the challenge. Does that mean he would have been voted out? I don't know. Nick is a weasel, and he's really good at the game. He had the info knowing he was a target. Jess, I'd rather see Lyrsa go over Nick. Pat, Nick was going to go home that night, but unfortunately, the cards didn't fall that way. Lyrsa, I was going to vote with the group block on that first vote. I was voting with the group, pulling a Sandra on that vote. B, I couldn't find anything from B about this vote, but considering the rest of her alleged game, I'm not sure she knows either. I think this paints a pretty clear picture. No one knows, and this would have come down to how good Nick was at flipping the target off his back, and how much people like Davey, Christian, and Gabby were willing to stick their neck out for him. Ironically, Nick was possibly saved by the thing he probably fears most, a big blue wave. Got nothing else for ya. Which of these winners do you think came closest to going home first? How does Survivor history change? Let me know in the comments. Until next time, don't get idled out.